So several years ago at Thanksgiving, my cousin, he looks across the table at me and he says, "You almost made it into the high school curriculum." All my family members kind of laughed inside. They all knew what he was talking about. See, my cousin, he works for one of those companies that decides what goes into the high school curriculum, what goes into the books. And he explained that when the topic of free speech came up, that my case came up for possible inclusion. He said it was pretty fun to raise his hand and say, "Yeah, that was my cousin." Unfortunately, I did not make it into the high school curriculum. And maybe that was for the best. Because to be honest, I still don't know how I feel about all that. It happened during my junior year of high school. I was junior class president, and I was a very presidential young man. This all took place at Centennial High School, Portland, Oregon, 1995. So first day of my junior year, first day of being class president, I showed up to school with this huge, fresh black eye. I'd gotten punched out at a punk rock show. And I was wearing this t-shirt that just says "Vacuuming Sucks" in big black letters. Now, the student activities director, he was not impressed with my sense of professionalism. And I quickly learned that I was not impressed with the job of being junior class president. We decided things like the theme for the winter formal, how pep rallies should go, ideas for Spirit Fridays. These were things that I had a very limited interest in, to say the least. And my attitude probably showed that. Now, when I ran for class president at the end of my sophomore year, I kind of looked like a homeless kid from the psych ward. First line of my speech was, "Most of you know me, some of you want to beat me up, and I want to be your junior class president." And I won. I actually fucking won. Kind of surprised everyone, including me. Now understand, I wasn't a complete nihilist or anything. I still cared about some things. I still had good grades. I cared about what my friends and my family thought about me. I wasn't a sociopath or anything. I just didn't care what the world at large thought about me. It was one of the best gifts that the universe could have ever given me in high school. So junior year, class president. It was a slow start. First couple months of school, not much happened. Honestly, the whole class president thing felt rather pointless. It was just a nice accolade for a college application. But a few months in, I actually had the chance to start being presidential. The whispers started slowly. I started hearing them in physics class and then in trigonometry. The band kids were whispering. I wasn't in band, but I knew a lot of the band kids, and the band teacher had been absent for a couple of weeks, and so had one of the senior girls in band. So I started asking around. Every band kid that I asked had a different anecdote, a little interaction that they'd seen between the band teacher and the student. Now each story on its own, it wouldn't have proved anything, but all 40 stories together, it became evidently clear that they were having a sexual relationship. And the principal had gone down and stood in front of the band class and explained that Mr. Dyer is going through some personal things and that he'd be taking the rest of the month off from school. Now, obviously, that was a lie. And as class president, I thought I should set the record straight. So I went home after school that day, and with the help of a couple of friends, I put together an underground newspaper, titled the newspaper The Goons of Hazard. I wrote the lead article, titled it "Do I Get an A?" I wrote under the pseudonym Jimmy Side Pocket, and I talked about how teachers probably shouldn't be sleeping with their students in high school, that it didn't set a great precedent. You know, we had some other amazing articles like making smoking a school sport so you could get a little cigarette pin for your Letterman jacket, real highbrow stuff. So I made 50 copies of the paper, 2 pages stapled together, and I stuffed those into my backpack and I showed up to school half hour early the next morning. And I slid a few copies into this bathroom, a few copies into that bathroom, A few copies here, a few copies there, a few copies into the locker room. Then the first bell rang. School started, and it didn't take long. By third period, there were copies everywhere. Kids were making copies left and right. Even the teachers were reading it at this point. I'd hear the students between classes in the hallways like, "Oh, he was sleeping with her? Oh, he was fucking her?" I mean, it was going way better than I ever imagined. And it didn't take long for the school administration to figure out who'd written it. I was in fourth period math class, and the school security guard comes into the room, points at me, and he says, "You, come with me." Well, they'd figured out who Jimmy Side Pocket was. I was a little bit scared. So I get up, and I follow him down to the principal's office. The principal is there, the vice principal, and the student activities director. And when I walk in, the principal, he says, "Are you Jimmy Side Pocket?" I kind of smirked, figured there was no way out of this one. So I said, "Yeah, I'm Jimmy Side Pocket." And then the principal just unleashed on me. "You have no idea what you've done. Do you know what slander is? Do you know that Mr. Dyer can sue you for slander?" And I thought, uh-oh, maybe I flew a little too close to the sun on this one. But then I asked him, I was like, "Where is Mr. Dyer then?" And there was this pause between them, and it lasted just a little too long before the principal said, "Mr. Dyer is going through some personal things, and that is all." And then they called my mother, and she came down to pick me up. And then they told me that I was suspended for 2 weeks, that I was no longer junior class president, and because I'd broken so many rules that I was facing possible expulsion. On the car ride home with my mom, I told her, "Mom, I really think the band teacher was sleeping with one of his students." And my mom said, "Well, then you did the right thing." So that night after dinner, telephone rang. This is back in the time of landlines, and it was for me. So I pick up, say hello, and this voice says, "Hello, Ezra. My daughter goes to school with you, and I work for the Oregonian." That's the big newspaper in Oregon, the big state paper. And he says, "I was wondering if you could tell me about what happened at school today." So I tell him all about it, and then he asked, "Would it be possible if I could come over to your house and do an interview with you?" So I asked my folks, and they say, "Yeah, absolutely." So a couple hours later, this guy shows up, and he's brought a photographer and a lighting crew, and they take pictures of me and my family sitting on the couch. And then he does this big interview with me, and I tell him about what happened, what I'd heard, why I'd written the newspaper, the punishment that the school had given me, the whole story. The interview lasted about an hour or so, and at the end of it, we stood up, shook hands, and he told me, "You're going to be in tomorrow's newspaper." And I thought, all right. Looks like Jimmy's Side Pocket is back. So the next morning, I wake up early, and I go out to the mailbox, grab the paper, and I go inside, and I set the newspaper down on the dining room table. And there I am on the front page, a picture of me and my family sitting on the couch. And then I read the article. Turns out that the parents of that student, the one who'd been absent, well, they had filed statutory rape charges against the band teacher, and the school administration had been trying to keep it quiet. Looks like I wasn't going to get sued for slander after all. And then the phone, it just started ringing nonstop. By noon, I was doing TV interviews with all the local news stations out in front of my house. And I was hitting back. You bet I was hitting back. I was talking about losing my presidency, about trying to do the right thing, the school punishing me. You bet I was hitting back. So that night, I made all the local evening news broadcasts. There I was on TV, and then the phone really started ringing. I mean, nonstop. People were calling me from across the state to congratulate me for being a brave young man. And the next day, it was even worse. I did more interviews with other newspapers. I even did an interview with a college law review journal. The phone was just ringing and ringing. And at first, I'll admit it, I liked the attention. I did. I'd never experienced anything like that before. But very quickly, it all just became really overwhelming. And I started to realize, I don't think I like the spotlight. But then a movie producer called me, said she'd read about me in the newspaper, that she was in Portland making a movie based on a very similar topic. And then she asked me if I wanted to be in it. Of course I said yes. I've always been interested in how movies were made. And 2 days later, I'm on a movie set shaking hands with Angelina Jolie. Movie sets are crazy places. They're just full of people who just crave attention. And that's kind of the exact opposite of what I wanted at that point. But I did end up selling weed to a couple of the actors on the set. I did like that part. Movie's called Foxfire. Not a great film, but if you watch the trailer, you can catch a glimpse of old Jimmy's side pocket. And at home, man, when I got home, the phone, it just kept ringing and ringing. More interviews, made the front page of the Oregonian again. And this is in the span of a week. I was really starting to feel overwhelmed. Now, the school district, they were taking some hits, some serious PR hits. And the principal, he calls me up and says, hey, we'd like to meet with you tomorrow. So the next day, I'm back in the principal's office with my mother, and the principal is there, and the vice principal, and the student activities director. But now there's also a superintendent and a lawyer, and the principal, he starts in, hey, I just wanted to say that we're sorry about the misunderstanding. And we'd like to let you know that you're no longer suspended and that you can have your class presidency back and you can come back to school tomorrow if you like. And I'm just sitting there thinking, what happened to getting sued for slander? And I was just starting to fill up with rage. Filling up. So I let him have a little bit of my rage. I was like, wait a minute. What? You scare the shit out of me. You threaten me with a lawsuit while trying to cover up all his shit. And now that you got caught, you're like, oh, you're not in trouble anymore. You're supposed to be the adults here. You're supposed to be the role models. What kind of lessons are you trying to fucking teach me here? Fuck off. Even my mom's like, simmer down, young man, simmer down. And they all just sat there in silence. And I do have to say, when you're 16 years old and you can tell someone in authority, someone in direct authority over you, to fuck off without any repercussions, that feels pretty good. That feels really good. So we left the office, went home, and the phone had just kept ringing and ringing, and I'm starting to reach critical mass. I don't want to talk anymore. I don't want any more of this attention. And that evening, my older brother, he's 19, graduated, but still living at home, he says to me, hey, we should get back into fly fishing. I think he could tell that I was starting to feel really overwhelmed. Our dad had taken us fishing as kids. And my older brother says, let's just drive out to the Deschutes tomorrow. We'll borrow Dad's waders and gear, and we'll go. And that's exactly what we did. We went fishing. I did not go back to school the next day. And it was wonderful, wonderful. We didn't catch anything. But standing in the middle of a river, oh God, that felt so good. It was just a reprieve from everything. And that evening when we got home, the phone's just ringing and ringing. And one of the phone calls that night, it was a lawyer from the ACLU. Lawyer told me that she'd read all about me in the paper and that what I had done was great and that we had a real case on our hands, that we could fight for student free speech rights, and that the case was substantial, that it was significant. But at this point, I was just done talking. I didn't want to be the spokesperson for student free speech rights. One of my biggest regrets to this day, because that lawsuit probably could have paid for college and then some. But I just told her, it's like, look, I'm sorry, but I just think I want to go fishing. And I hung up. And that's exactly what I did. Next day, brother and I, we drove back out to the Deschutes, went fishing. I did not go back to school. And it was absolutely amazing. Now, of course, I did go back to school and continued to be junior class president. But for the rest of my junior year, I skipped every Thursday and Friday, drove out to the Deschutes, and went fishing with my brother. And the school administration said nothing. Nothing. They didn't want any more trouble. And my GPA in my junior year, I got a .75. I went from a 4 to a .75. But I was starting to learn how to catch trout on the Deschutes. Fair trade-off, to say the least. I mean, I fell in love. I just fell in love with standing in the middle of a river. I remember one morning specifically, brother and I, we'd walk down the train tracks to our favorite spot. We called it the Boulder Patch. And I waded out into the river waist deep, and I looked upstream, and the caddisflies and the mayflies were bouncing off the surface of the water, and the trout were rising and feeding on them, and the red-winged blackbirds were singing their song in the bushes, and the crickets were humming, and there was an off-spray overhead. And the whole place, it just felt electric, like touching your tongue to a 9-volt battery. Electric. It was everywhere. And as I stood there waist deep in the river, I knew that I'd found something special, something that not everyone finds in this lifetime. I found a place where I was so excited every time I showed up, like a little kid just giddy. A place that let me forget about everything else. Rivers are amazing places. Even to this day, I still feel that same excitement when I wade out into the water. It's still just as electric, like it was back in high school. And I feel so lucky to have found rivers and fishing in high school. Because high school, it's a crucial time when you're trying to develop your sense of right and wrong. And these microcosms of morality are constantly unfolding in front of you. And these moments, they imprint on you as a teenager. They imprint, like the school administration covering up the sins of one of its teachers and intimidating me and threatening me, and then getting caught and turning around and saying like, oh, we're sorry, we made a mistake. These things imprint on you as a teenager. And I wasn't without my own sin. Several months after the whole underground newspaper incident, as class president, I was put in charge of selling prom tickets. And it was easy to rig the numbers. I'd sell 20 tickets a day and fix the numbers so I only sold 15, pocket the difference. I stole $800 to $1,000 from the school, and I did it willingly. Thought the school had fucked me, so I was gonna fuck them. I mean, I was a teenager. I was in the beginning stages of developing my sense of morality. And when I look back on it now, I don't feel great about stealing from the school. But at the same time, I don't feel bad about ruining Mr. Dyer's career whatsoever. There's some things that you just shouldn't do. You just shouldn't sleep with your students in high school. So at the Thanksgiving table with my family all reflecting on the story, I said, could you guys imagine me being the advocate for student free speech rights when I was 16 years old? The ACLU would have had their hands full. I don't think they would have been ready for Jimmy's side pocket. And all my family members kind of laughed and started bringing up other terrible things that I had done. And I think they knew that I was right.